Or wait, are we time lapse talks or time lapse talk? I always forget.
I
What's
don't
our
know.
what's our YouTube name? Hey everyone, welcome back to Time Lapse Talks,
I'm Chelsea,
and I'm Noah.
and today we're gonna talk about titties through time again.
Last week we had an awesome discussion, mainly focusing on boobs throughout history, and today we will expand upon that, mainly hearing from our lovely guest Miranda.
What are we gonna be watching?
Inspired by last week's video and discussion, I have decided to draw for you a pair of orange titties.
Awesome.
And if you don't get that reference, please go watch the first video.
Do you love art? Well, duh. And can you never get enough? Well, have no fear, 'cause Chelsea and Noah are here to talk about art and stuff.
All I reached during this journey was somewhat of a conclusion, and we already touched on this, how there's a lack of variation and there's a lot of questions to be answered. But what do you guys think?
I think it's important that we recognize how our art history has been crafted, and that these are the standards that have been set for centuries, and that I feel like there's a problem if we don't continue to try expressing variation in different points of view and of not just female bodies, but all people and ideas. But you can't change the past, I guess. So it's important to have these observations.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it really highlights what history has been focused on and the artists that it's been focused on. And it just shows the lack of diversity through that alone, you know?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even all of these white artists that we're seeing, many of them were not white artists. I doubt there's many, if any. But it might just be that we're also just not seeing the art of all sorts of different people.
You know, if I would look up Indian art, you know, I easily found modern, like 2000s and up, and I easily found ancient Indian, but I had a lot of trouble finding anywhere in between. Yeah, and it's just sort of like a forgotten time period. I don't know, maybe I'm sure there was art done.
1612 to what? 1947, they were under British rule. So
That's true.
So I mean, I think that also goes to show how influence and this idea of colonial expansion has affected the art world for centuries and limited a lot of the evolution. I mean, I bet if you look at a lot of cultures during that period, you'd see just a huge decrease in the amount of art being read by those people.
Oh, wow. I wonder if there would be a way to I mean, I'm sure there was some.
I'm sure, but the thing is, it doesn't survive as well because it's not being collected by historians and it's not being procured by the wealthy and it's not being, this.
It's so sad.
And it's tragic. So it's like you have all this ancient stuff that all these fucking people would come in and they'd be like, "Oh, I discovered this tomb," and then they'd raid all the art. So you have all this ancient art that we can all see because it's in these British museums.
Yeah.
And then you have this big blank period where they've erased a lot of people's artistic history. And then now you have a resurgence of that.
So when I was doing research for this and I wanted to show the variation of women's boobs compared to what is seen in art, I wanted to find actual pictures, but all I could really get was drawings, and I guess I'm just sort of amazed that even to this day, you can't just in modern day, you can't find just like a raw image of a breast, whether or not it's like sexualized, it's kind of hard to find. It's kind of hard to find an image of a breast that's not sexualized or like a political statement. Like, I don't see why it's not casual. And it seems like it's interesting to go back through all these art and like see the portrayal of boobs shift and evolve, but like never come to a point where it's just like okay to have them. I'm a very free the nipple person. I'm just like very surprised that there was no period in which it was just like completely okay to have them out.
That painting that you showed of like the more feminine woman, like Mary feeding baby Jesus, like Gothic style, that was under like super heavy Christian rule. So paintings never showcased nudity unless it was Adam, Eve, or Mary. That was the only acceptable like way to showcase, because Adam and Eve, it was to showcase their sin, and then Mary, she's like breastfeeding baby Jesus. And so the Renaissance came, and it was acceptable again to to showcase female and male nudity, but it was always in like a mythological setting, and it was supposed to be almost like exalting, like the women were or like being staged, it wasn't realistic. And so it was always not necessarily like sensual, but it's like on display, even in the 1800s and 1900s, as like that evolved, and like with the French Impressionists, they set them in more realistic settings, but it was still often like sensual or sexual in some sort of way.
Do you want to go through some of your notes?
Yeah.
I feel like you just did a little bit, but it'd be nice to hear what you have to say, because I feel like I definitely talked a lot.
Like Renaissance art and like the role that female bodies played, and especially like female nudity. I think you had one of Titian's paintings up, but he has this very famous painting called The Rape of Europa. And the myth, essentially, I'm probably going to mess up some of the details. Europa was this nymph fairy person, and Zeus, the god, he fell in love with her, and so he decided to trick her. He turned into a bull and like got her to get on his back, and then he like carried her across the sea, essentially, to rape her. And so there's this very famous painting commissioned by King Philip II of Spain, called The Rape of Europa, and it showcases Europa being taken away, and it's very like volatile and kind of like hard to look at, but it's a very beautiful painting. But what's really interesting is that like princes especially would commission this type of work, stories of women being like abused or assaulted, or it was sort of to like parallel the power dynamic of the king. So it was like for their own private collection, these stories of women painted by men for men in power. So I thought that was really interesting.
That's dark.
Yeah,
I know. If you ever look at Rubens too, the dude from was in the Renaissance time, I think, he painted a lot of nude females, but they're often like being like preyed upon, they're being like tricked or drugged, or just all sorts of really messed up stuff. And his females are often they're really interesting because they're not as like smooth as like other Renaissance paintings are. They're kind of chubby, and something that was like the way he paints his females almost looks like they're like meant to be consumed, which is really really dark,
Whoa, I'm looking at one right now, and it's like these royalty like on a stage being catered to by servants, and then underneath there's all these like naked women tied up. Like, what the fuck? Oh my god. Wow, I've never seen these before. I wonder if he felt conflicted about painting these, or if, I don't know. I'm so curious about these.
What's really interesting about The Rape of Europa is that it is, do you know who Isabella Stewart Gardner is?
No.
So she was this like 20th century like sort of Boston socialite. She collected art from like all over the world. She was like very famous for taking artists under her wing. So she she collected this painting for her private, for her private collection, which is now a museum in Boston called the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. But what's really interesting is that because the collection had been in like private eyes since like, I guess it's, its creation, it was like one of the first times women, were allowed in that period to actually look at the art. So it actually almost changed the message of what the painting was saying, because like the eyes of the King Philip, it was like he was looking at it as Zeus, like he's in like a dominating position. But from the eyes of a woman, if you look at her face, you can see like her fear and terror. So it's like alive almost. So it's really interesting how just the perspective of person looking at a painting can change its meaning.
Which painting are we looking at?
I'm looking at all the works of Peter Paul Rubens.
He was into some fucked up stuff.
Here's one of a nude woman serving a man tea. Here's one of a woman trying to escape a man who's grappling her. Yeah. Yep. Yippity yup. They are all like that, pretty much. I mean, some of them are not. Some of them...
There are some just portraits.
Yeah, some of them are okay. Some of them are like depictions of scenes that are not like that, but a lot of them are.
A lot of them are pretty
Yeah.
up, a lot of they at least have very menacing vibes.
What else you got, Miranda?
So between like the Renaissance and like the 19th and 20th century, I didn't find much, but it's interesting, like in the 19th century, more sort of like the late 19th century, how the perspective of like female nudity was started to shift in the way it was being portrayed. I found this really interesting painting. Do you know who Marcel Duchamp is?
Yeah, we talked about him in the What is Art episode quite a bit. Are you talking about Nude Descending the Stairs?
Yes. Yeah, that painting is so interesting. I found this commentary about that painting and how it was super scandalous when it was first created, not because it was a nude, but because the woman was moving. And so it
What?
female nudity was like it was like reclined and almost in like a passive position. Like we were talking about earlier, that very stereotypical idea of like the woman laying back and maybe she'd like have her hands like over her crotch and then like maybe her like hand would be like over her boobs or something. So this like actually the woman is like in action, which is totally turns the idea of the female nude on its head,
But it's like the most abstract depiction of a woman going down the stairs you could possibly have. How could anybody be mad over it? Oh my god.
I can't tell which is the stair and which is the woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like
crazy. Duchamp was a genius. I mean, we argued about that, but he's a genius.
his urinal. What is that piece
His
called?
the fountain.
Yes. That's hilarious. Yeah, all throughout like the 20th century, it shifts a lot as culture just sort of like rapidly changed. So there's that guy Paul Gauguin we were talking about, who's friends with Van Gogh. He is very interesting, like much more realistic and varied portraits of naked women and the women of color too, which is really interesting. He has this one called The Delightful Land. He painted in 1892. So it's a Tahitian Eve in the Garden of Eden. She has like dark hair and she has pubic hair too. And she also has a foot with like 7 toes. It's like, super bizarre.
How do we think the model had 7 toes?
That's a great question. Like artistic interpretation. What do you think?
I like these. So you said when were these made? The 60s?
No, these ones were painted in like late 1800s.
Okay. That's good. This is like the first instance of anyone of color being portrayed.
I could find. I mean, I'm sure there are others.
Yeah. In westernized culture, this is like the first instance we could find of a woman of color in a painting nude.
Yeah.
And we had to go through like the whole Renaissance period and then all the way up to the 1800s. Like that's crazy.
And then diverse bodies. I found this all the way up to like the 90s, basically. There's this dude named Lucian Freud, and he's like famous for painting like very fat women. And it's really interesting. There's this one called Benefit Supervisor Sleeping he painted in 1995. So when I was like doing my research about the origins of like naked female bodies, there's the Venus figurines, which were like these found from like the Upper Paleolithic period, which was like 35,000 BCE, sort of. And people aren't like quite sure what they were for, but they were generally just like very round with like huge, like kind of sagging boobs. And they were thought to maybe be like fertility, goddesses of fertility or something. So it's really interesting that his paintings sort of like reflect that. The bodies are so different from anything I've like ever seen in paintings.
I love these.
I know, aren't they awesome?
These are awesome. I've actually seen these during my research, but they were more of an exception to the rule, so I didn't think to bring them up, but I do love these. You know, in painting a more full-figured woman, there's just like so much more detail to add, and it's a lot more beautiful in the end, at least I think.
I was about to say, I feel like this would be overall a much more challenging painting because you're getting all of the life in this person.
Yeah. So just specific to the model as opposed to like the Renaissance period, it literally looked like they were just sketching or painting like the sculptures they saw from like the Greek and Roman periods.
Have you seen this guy's painting? I think it's called Nude with Leg Up. I know we're supposed to be mostly talking about boobs, but I often, especially in modern day, you know, I feel like the portrayal of penises is very heavy in ancient Greece and Rome, and then it stopped forever. So, or then there's Michelangelo doing David, but he, you know, he made the penis very proportionately small. This guy who you're talking about, Lucian Freud, comes out with this nude with leg up, and it's just like, this is a real dude. He has a dick.
Yeah.
You know, I love this artist. I'm so happy that you've shed light on him.
Yeah, I'm happy I found him too, because I've like I said, I've never really seen models like this before used in painting. He has like such a wealth of diversity, hasn't been showcased literally any of the other paintings we saw.
I think artists need more balls. You know, I think a lot of people do art that they think they're supposed to be doing, following the beauty standard, etc.
Well, it's all this drive to be popular too, right? You want to do things that'll be popular, so you copy all the things that are popular, and all the things that are popular are all the same. But I think if our discussion anyway reflects the rest of the world, there's much more interest in that diverse look into the world and seeing art in totally different ways, different bodies in art, and art made by different people.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, like, if you look up famous nude paintings of women, like the first two results have the exact same pose and body type. Like, if you switched their heads, you wouldn't notice because it's exactly the same, even though they're done by two different artists 50 years apart. You just wouldn't know. So when an artist has diversity in body type, it's just very refreshing. And it's not like, you know, somebody might draw somebody who's like a little bit bigger or a little bit different in body type. But Lucian Freud was like, no, I'm going all the way. I'm going to paint body types you have never seen in art before.
There's female artist I was talking about, which is the only female artist I came across in my research. Her name is Micheline Thomas. She's a female African-American painter. Her work is like in the 21st century, and she's the only female artist I came across. And she has this really beautiful painting from 2007 called A Little Taste Outside of Love. And I'm not sure if the model is her or not, but it's this sort of black woman in the nude, just sort of reclining on this like bed of just a bunch of like textured pillows and stuff. But it's like just so, I mean, and her boob too is very realistic, which is really cool.
See, it is nice. It has gravity.
Yes, but it's like so crazy to me, and not surprising, but crazy to me that she's the only female painter I came across.
Yeah. When I was trying to get ideas for a video, I just looked up like best artists through history, and Google just gave me like a list of 20, and there were only 2 women, and
Wow.
it was Frida Kahlo and Georgia O'Keeffe. And I think
Oh yeah.
Frida Kahlo was like the only person of color on that whole list.
Kahlo painted some boobs, right?
She might have, but I can't recall.
There's this one that came up, The Broken Column, 1944. It's like her spine, you can see through her chest, and
Oh yeah.
it's like mechanical. Is that her?
Yes. I know The Broken Column. Oh, yeah, it does. I think that's like one of the only ones. She painted hers very wide set and dome-like.
Still, that's pretty cool, especially to like, obviously I wasn't alive in 1944, but I imagine like it's kind of, I mean, a lot of her paintings are kind of provocative.
Yeah. So she was around, her life was pretty much the same time period as Georgia O'Keeffe, and I know Georgia O'Keeffe's nudes were very controversial, so I'm sure. And Frida Kahlo lived in a time in Mexico that was like putting women down. Like they were supposed to act a certain way, blah, 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 and she defied that. So I'm sure that this painting is much more controversial than I thought about before. Any more from you?
I could talk about boobs forever.
Thanks everyone for coming and talking about titties with us, and a big thank you to Miranda for coming and sharing her perspective on things.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Please like and subscribe.
Comment in the comment below.
Pound that like button.
Comment your favorite titty in history below.
Thanks for stopping by. If you still can't get enough, then come back on and join next time to hear more talk about art and stuff.